Have you ever walked into an old medieval church, glanced up at the arches or pews, and suddenly locked eyes with a face made entirely of leaves? A mysterious figure with vines twisting from his mouth, branches sprouting from his cheeks, watching silently from the shadows of stone. That's the Green Man, an ancient symbol hidden in plain sight, carved into the very bones of Europe's oldest cathedrals and chapels. But here's the thing, no one really knows who he is. A pagan god disguised in Christian art, a forgotten spirit of the forest, or something far older, far stranger, whispering secrets across centuries. For hundreds of years, this leafy enigma has been staring down at worshippers, travelers, and historians alike, daring them to unravel his meaning. You'll find him tangled in the corners of English abbeys, peering from French cloisters, even lurking in the stonework of remote village churches. Yet despite being everywhere, his origins are shrouded in mystery. Medieval craftsmen carved him with care but left no instructions, no explanations, just that haunting, silent gaze. Why did they keep returning to this symbol, blending nature and humanity in such a startling way? What were they trying to tell us or warn us about? Today, we're stepping into the footsteps of those who have tried to decode the Green Man's secrets. We'll wander through crumbling ruins and dusty archives, piecing together clues from folklore, art, and even the whispers of long-dead cultures. Because this isn't just about a curious carving, it's about the echoes of beliefs so old they've tangled their roots deep into our collective memory. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a medieval church the same way again. So let's begin where every good mystery should, with a face in the shadows and a question that refuses to stay buried. The earliest whispers of the Green Man reach back much further than the medieval carvings we know best. Take a journey to southern France, where a weathered stone from around the 2nd century still cradles an ancient secret, a face wreathed in leaves with vines spilling from his mouth like a forgotten language. This isn't nestled in some grand temple, but carved into the tombstone of a Roman soldier, a quiet clue that the Green Man's story began long before Christianity embraced him. But how did a pagan symbol, possibly tied to deities like Celtic Cernunnos or even older vegetation gods, end up woven into the fabric of medieval churches? Some scholars believe the Green Man was too powerful to erase, a bridge between the old world and the new. Imagine a 6th century craftsman in a newly converted village, his hands shaping stone for a Christian chapel, yet his mind lingering on the forest spirits his grandfather once worshipped. By hiding the Green Man among the saints and gargoyles, did these artisans preserve something they couldn't bear to lose? Others argue the church repurposed him deliberately, turning a symbol of wild nature into a warning. Those leafy tendrils could represent sin strangling the soul, or a reminder of mortality, how even the lush vitality of spring decays with time. Yet look closely at places like Tewkesbury Abbey, where green men cluster near altars, almost guarding sacred spaces. If the church wanted to suppress him, why carve him where prayer was most fervent? The truth might be messier and more human. Symbols, like stories, refuse to stay neatly in their boxes. The Green Man slipped through the cracks of history because he meant too many things to too many people, a silent witness to the way beliefs bend but never quite break. Look closely at enough medieval carvings and you'll start to notice the Green Man isn't just one face. He's a chorus of voices, each with its own story etched in stone. Scholars often group these mysterious figures into 3 distinct types, each more unsettling than the last. First, there's the Foliate Head, the classic Green Man whose entire visage is consumed by foliage. His skin melts into oak leaves, his hair becomes tendrils of ivy, his eyes peering through a mask of living green. You'll find him in places like Southwell Minster in England, where his serene, almost peaceful expression contrasts strangely with the way nature has utterly claimed him. Is this a portrait of harmony with the wild, or a warning of how easily humanity can disappear into the forest? Then there's the Disgorging Head, a far more violent vision. Here, the green man doesn't just wear leaves, he vomits them. Vines burst from his mouth in a torrent, as if his very breath is birthing the natural world. Some carvings, like those in Rosslyn Chapel, show branches spewing so violently they twist into the faces of onlookers, weaving them into the chaos. Was this medieval artistry's way of showing nature's uncontrollable power? Or a metaphor for the creative act itself, the artist disgorging beauty from some inner wilderness? But the most haunting of all is the Bloodsucker Head. This version doesn't just merge with vegetation, it's attacked by it. Thick vines snake from his eyelids, his nostrils, even his ears, as if the forest is invading from within. In Kilpeck Church's famous carving, the tendrils look less like decoration and more like shackles, the green man's face contorted in what might be ecstasy or agony. Some researchers tie this to ancient myths of sacrificial gods, their bodies feeding the earth. Others see a darker parallel, the medieval obsession with bodily decay, a reminder that even in life, nature is always pulling us back into the soil. What's fascinating is how these three types often appear together, clustered in the same churches like fragments of a conversation. A Foliate Head might watch calmly from a capital while a Disgorging Head roars across the aisle, as if the carvers were debating nature's role through stone. Were they illustrating different facets of the same belief, or capturing a tension between reverence and fear? The answer might lie in the places where these faces hide, not just in dark corners, but framing altars, guarding doorways, even smiling down from baptismal fonts. Wherever they appear, one thing's clear: the green man was never just decoration. He was a question carved in oak and stone, waiting for us to listen. On first glance, the green man and Britain's later Jack in the Green seem like twins, separated by centuries, both faces swallowed by foliage, both tied to nature's cycles. But peel back the layers and you'll find these figures spring from entirely different soil. The medieval green man hides in stone, his origins blurring into pre-Christian Europe, while Jack in the Green bursts onto the scene much later, a boisterous, dancing figure woven into May Day celebrations of the 1700s and 1800s. So are they branches of the same ancient tree or just coincidental kin? Jack in the Green was no silent stone sentinel. He was a living, breathing spectacle, a costumed reveler draped in a towering frame of fresh greenery, parading through villages as the centerpiece of spring festivals. Paintings from the time show him as a walking thicket, surrounded by chimney sweeps and Morris dancers, his foliage trembling with every step. Unlike the green man's cryptic gaze, Jack was loud, playful, a temporary embodiment of nature's return. Some folklorists argue he evolved from older May Day customs, like the Celtic Beltane fires, where communities celebrated the land's reawakening. Others trace him to practical jokes, milkmaids decorating their tools with flowers, which later morphed into this whimsical, leafy giant. But here's where things get tangled. A few scholars insist Jack in the Green carries echoes of the green man's deeper magic. In pockets of Britain, May Day processions would end with Jack's symbolic death, his greenery torn apart and scattered, mirroring ancient sacrifice rituals. Sound familiar? It's not so different from the Bloodsucker Heads in medieval churches, their bodies feeding the earth through stone. Could Jack be a distant, watered-down cousin of those older, darker myths? Yet the differences might outweigh the similarities. The green man belongs to sacred spaces, his face a bridge between pagan and Christian worlds. Jack in the Green was pure street theater, a folk revival with no clear ties to medieval carvers. Perhaps they're not relatives at all, but separate answers to the same human urge, to give nature a face, a voice, a role in our stories. One lingers in whispers, carved where shadows fall longest. The other laughed in sunlight, dancing until his leaves fell. Both remind us that the wild never really leaves us, it just finds new ways to be remembered. Chartres Cathedral, that towering masterpiece of Gothic architecture, holds a secret among its soaring spires and stained glass. Hidden high above the nave, tucked between biblical saints and angelic hosts, dozens of green men peered down, some serene, some snarling, all unmistakably pagan at first glance. How did these leafy interlopers infiltrate one of Christianity's most sacred spaces? The answer might lie in the medieval mind's genius for finding harmony where we'd expect heresy. Walk the labyrinth of Chartres, and you'll spot green men framing scenes of resurrection, Christ rising from the tomb, Lazarus unbound from his shroud. Their placement is no accident. To medieval theologians, vines bursting from mouths could symbolize the Word of God taking root in the soul. The cyclical rebirth of leaves mirrored Christ's victory over death, nature's eternal return becoming a sermon in stone. Even the church's famed stained glass, dappling the floor with forest light, seems to whisper, the divine isn't separate from creation but woven through it. But not all churches tell the same story. In Germany's Lübeck Cathedral, green men lurk in shadowy corners, their foliage twisted into grotesque knots. Here, they might have served as cautionary tales, the wild, untamed earth contrasted with the ordered grace of salvation. Yet step into Ireland's Clonfert Cathedral, and you'll find them flanking the baptismal font, their leaves almost shimmering with dew. Could these carvers have seen the green man as a guardian of sacred thresholds, a bridge between the untamed world and the sanctified? The most compelling theory isn't about conquest but conversation. When Christianity spread across Europe, it didn't erase older beliefs, it conversed with them. A green men carved beside a crucifix might have been the medieval equivalent of speaking two languages at once, the new faith acknowledging the old without surrendering to it. After all, if God created nature, why couldn't its ancient symbols find fresh meaning? Chartres stonemasons may have grasped something we've forgotten, that mystery thrives not in purity, but in the fertile ground where traditions intertwine. Look at the green men carved where no casual worshipper would ever spot them, tucked under choir stalls, hidden in the shadows of buttresses, even crouched upside down on roof bosses. These weren't just decorations, they were a secret language chiseled by stonemasons who knew their craft held power beyond mere mortar and stone. Medieval guilds guarded their knowledge fiercely, passing down techniques through whispered oaths and cryptic symbols. The green man, with his roots in both pagan reverence and Christian adaptation, may have been their perfect cipher, a way to encode beliefs too dangerous to speak aloud. Consider the Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh, where dozens of green men cluster in the ceiling's darkest recesses. Some scholars argue these placements align with celestial patterns, their leaves mirroring constellations known to alchemists. Others note how the carvings often appear near hidden markings, masons' compasses, pentagrams, or the occasional alchemical symbols scratched into the stone. Was this medieval steganography embedding occult knowledge in plain sight? The stonemasons' guilds, after all, were among the few who could read and write. What better way to preserve forbidden ideas than in the very walls of the church itself? Then there's the matter of the foliate spiral, a recurring motif where vines spewing from a green man's mouth twist into intricate geometric patterns. These spirals bear a striking resemblance to alchemical diagrams of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, symbolizing eternal cycles. In places like Germany's Regensburg Cathedral, these designs appear alongside carvings of the zodiac, suggesting the green man might have been a visual shorthand for the union of earth and cosmos. But the boldest theory comes from the margins of old guild manuscripts, where notes in cipher describe the Verdant One as a guide to hidden knowledge. One 16th century text, decoded in the 1960s, refers to a living stone that could speak through leaves, a possible allusion to the philosopher's stone of alchemy. Whether literal or metaphorical, it's clear some stonemasons saw their work as more than labor. It was a ritual, each chisel struck a step toward revelation. Yet not all hidden green men point to the esoteric. Some may simply mark a mason's signature, like the grinning Foliate Head in Norwich Cathedral. tucked where only another craftsman would notice. Others could be inside jokes, a sly nod to the Green Chapel of Arthurian legend, where Gawain faced the wild in the form of the Green Knight. What unites them is their secrecy. These carvings weren't meant for the congregation's eyes. They were conversations in stone, waiting centuries for someone to decipher their leafy tongue. Not all green men smile serenely from their leafy thrones. Some snarl with teeth bared, their vines coiled like serpents ready to strike. In the shadowy recesses of Exeter Cathedral, one such figure glowers down, his face contorted in a rictus of pain as thorns pierce his eyelids. This isn't just nature's embrace, it's nature's wrath. For centuries, a darker thread has woven through the green man's legacy, the theory that these carvings weren't benevolent spirits but warnings. Whispers of demons, sin, and the untamed wilderness of the human soul. Take the infamous leafy demon of Burgos Cathedral in Spain, where a green man's mouth gapes unnaturally wide, disgorging not just foliage but what looks like screaming faces tangled in the roots. Art historians argue this grotesque version reflects medieval fears of the forest, a place beyond church walls where pagans might still gather, where wolves and witches lurk. The church, in this reading, weaponized the green man as a cautionary tale. Let nature rule your heart and you'll be choked by its thorns. Even the placement of these darker carvings hints at their role perched above confessionals or near scenes of judgment, as if to remind worshippers what happens when the wild isn't tamed. But the demon theory grows thornier when you trace it back to pre-Christian Europe. Long before cathedrals rose, folklore spoke of the wild man, a hairy, feral creature lurking at civilization's edges, embodying everything ordered society feared. The green man's twisted variants might be his stone-born cousins, carrying forward that ancient dread. In Switzerland's Einsiedeln Abbey, one carving shows a foliate face with animalistic fangs, his vines morphing into chains that bind him. Is this the church's way of depicting original sin, or a holdover from older myths where nature spirits demanded tribute, or else? Yet the most chilling examples blur the line between warning and worship. In Scotland's Ruthwell Cross, an 8th century monument, a green man shares space with runic inscriptions praising Odin. His leaves are carved with such care they seem to quiver in the stone, a juxtaposition that raises questions. Was this a sly nod to pagan resilience, or proof that even the darkest symbols could be baptized into new meaning? Perhaps the truth lies in the eyes of the beholder. A 14th century monk might have crossed himself at the sight of a snarling green man, while the mason who carved it winked at his apprentice, knowing some secrets grow best in shadow. What's undeniable is the green man's duality, his ability to be both saint and sinner, guardian and ghoul. In the same way a forest offers shelter and danger, these carvings hold multitudes. They remind us that symbols like nature refuse to be pinned down. One moment they're whispering of life eternal, the next they're bearing teeth stained with the sap of older, darker roots. Amid the sea of leafy male faces peering from medieval stonework, a rare few break the mold faces with softer features, flowing hair tangled with blossoms instead of thorns. These are the foliate she's, the green women, hiding in plain sight. One of the most striking examples gazes down from Nantes Cathedral in France, her mouth blooming with delicate vines, her expression serene where so many male counterparts snarl. Why are she so uncommon, and what does her presence say about the stories we've been telling or forgetting? The Nantes green woman isn't alone. A handful of others lurk in neglected corners like the enigmatic figure in Switzerland's Grossmünster Abbey, her stone cheeks framed by apple branches, or the worn but unmistakable foliate face in Spain's San Juan de la Peña Monastery, where her tendrils curl like long hair. Some scholars argue these carvings are accidental, a mason's whim, or a misread design, but others see whispers of something older. Before the green man dominated church architecture, Europe's pagan pantheons teemed with nature goddesses. Flora with her spring blossoms, the Celtic Brigid weaving fire and foliage, even the Greek Persephone, whose return from the underworld each year made the earth flower. Could these stone women be their last echoes? There's a tantalizing clue in the way these figures are placed. Male green men often guard thresholds or loom above altars, but the few known female variants tend to appear near depictions of Mary, especially scenes of the Annunciation or the Virgin crowned in heaven. At Nantes, the green woman hovers just beside a stained glass window of Eden, her leaves mirroring the tree of life. Was this intentional? Medieval artists were masters of layered symbolism. By placing a foliate woman near paradise, they might have been tapping into an ancient idea, the earth as mother, the divine feminine as life-giver. Yet the debate grows thornier when you consider the Church's fraught relationship with female divinity. By the 12th century, worship of Mary had surged, but older goddesses were vilified as witches or demons. A green woman in sacred space would have been risky unless she served a clear Christian purpose. Some theorists suggest these carvings represent Eve after the fall, her shame literally sprouting into the thorns of labor. Others propose they're allegories of the Church herself, fruitful in her mission. But perhaps the simplest answer is the most human. Stonemasons weren't just copying templates, they were artists with memories. Maybe the woman at Nantes wasn't a goddess or a sermon, but someone's grandmother, her face remembered in leaves. After all, nature isn't just wildness to be feared. It's the garden tended by women's hands, the herbs healing sickness, the harvest feeding villages. The green woman's rarity might reflect medieval biases, but her existence, that's a rebellion in stone, a quiet reminder that the earth story was never just a man's to tell. The green man's leafy gaze isn't confined to European cathedrals. If you know where to look, you'll find his cousins whispering from temples, tombs, and sacred groves across the world. Take Celtic Cernunnos, the antlered god of the forests, carved onto the Gundestrup cauldron with vines spiraling from his palms like living offerings. Or Kushmanda, the Hindu goddess whose name means pumpkin flower, depicted in ancient texts as birthing the universe from her own foliage. Even older is Mesopotamia's Tammuz, a dying and rising god whose tears were said to water the earth each spring. Separated by continents and centuries, these figures share an uncanny kinship with the green man. But is this just humanity recycling archetypes or proof of something deeper? Archaeologists tracing the spread of Indo-European languages have noticed something peculiar. Wherever these early peoples migrated, their myths sprouted gods tangled in vegetation. The Slavic Leshy, a forest spirit with bark for skin, Greece's Dionysus, whose followers wore ivy crowns as they danced themselves into ecstasy, Persia's Hayama, a deity literally woven from sacred herbs. The similarities go beyond surface-level greenery. Many of these figures are tied to cycles of death and rebirth, their bodies merging with the land only to resurrect with the harvest. Could they all stem from a single ancient source, a Proto-Indo-European vegetation god carried westward on horseback, evolving with each new culture that embraced him? Yet not every leafy deity fits neatly into this family tree. West Africa's Yoruba traditions speak of Ojujuwa, a creator god who molded the earth from a handful of sacred soil. No leaves, but the same primal connection between flesh and land. Japan's Jomon-era clay figurines, some dating back 10,000 years, feature faces erupting in what looks like fern patterns. These outliers suggest something more profound than shared ancestry, a universal human impulse to see ourselves in the wild. Whether through cultural diffusion or collective imagination, humanity keeps returning to the same idea that nature isn't just around us but within us. The most tantalizing evidence lies in artifacts too old to label. A 6,000-year-old shaman's mask dug up in Israel, its wooden cheeks etched with flowering vines. Petroglyphs in Kazakhstan showing horned figures with branches growing from their shoulders. Even Ötzi the Iceman, preserved in alpine glaciers for 5 millennia, carried fungus strung around his neck, possibly as a ritual link to the forest. These finds hint that the Green Man's roots may stretch back to humanity's first encounters with agriculture, when the boundary between person and plant blurred in the dance of seasons. What's remarkable is how these figures diverge in meaning while sharing form. Cernunnos often appears with torques, symbols of wealth, his greenery representing abundance. Kushmanda's foliage is cosmic, her body a map of creation. Tammuz's story, meanwhile, is steeped in tragedy, his annual death necessary for life's continuance. The Green Man, nestled in churches, carries whispers of all three. Perhaps that's the real magic of these symbols, their mirrors, reflecting whatever a culture needs to see: terror, comfort, mystery. A Celtic warrior might have prayed to Cernunnos for a successful hunt, while a medieval peasant glanced up at a church carving and saw divine order in the chaos of growth. The question isn't really whether these figures share blood. It's why this symbol, above all others, has taken root in so many soils. From the icy steppes to the tropics, we keep fashioning the wild in our image, not as something to conquer, but as a face we recognize. The Green Man and his global kin remind us that every leaf, every vine, is part of an older, deeper conversation between Earth and those who walk upon it. In the cryptic world of medieval alchemy, where symbols held the weight of divine secrets, the Green Man takes on an even stranger role, not just a face in stone, but a key to unlocking matter itself. Alchemists called it the Green Lion, a term that sounds mythical but pointed to something startlingly concrete: the raw, chaotic substance known as prima materia, the base of all creation. Picture an ancient manuscript like the Ripley Scroll, its vibrant illustrations unfurling across yellowed parchment. There, amid dragons and celestial spheres, you'll find a figure both familiar and alien, a green man hybrid with leonine features, his foliage dissolving into bubbling flasks and coiled serpents. This wasn't decoration, it was a coded recipe for transformation. The Green Lion wasn't a literal beast, but a metaphor for the first step in the alchemical process, dissolving metals into their primordial state. Think of it as stripping paint from a canvas to reveal the bare wood beneath. Alchemists believed this greening phase mirrored nature's own cycles, where decay fed new growth. In manuscripts, the Green Lion is often shown devouring the sun, its jaws clamped around a golden disc, a warning: not quite. This violent image symbolized the dissolution of gold into its base components, a necessary destruction before rebirth. The Green Man's likeness, when merged with the lion, became a bridge between organic life and metallic mystery, his leaves representing vitality, his beastly half the untamed force required to break matter down. But why hide this knowledge in symbols? Medieval Europe was a dangerous place for alchemists. The church tolerated their work if it promised medical advances or gold for coffers, but delved too deep into esoteric truths, and accusations of heresy followed. The Ripley Scroll, attributed to 15th century alchemist George Ripley, is a masterpiece of this visual cipher. Its green lion appears alongside cryptic verses like "the lion is green in his blood," a phrase that likely referred to verdigris, the green rust forming when copper corrodes. To the untrained eye, it read as mystical poetry. To initiates, it was a precise instruction: use copper compounds in the first stage of the great work. What's fascinating is how this alchemical symbolism echoes older Green Man motifs. Just as church carvings showed vines bursting from mouths, alchemical texts depicted the Green Lion disgorging streams of liquid metal. The parallel isn't accidental. Both traditions grappled with the same profound idea that creation requires destruction, that life feeds on decay. A stonemason carving a Green Man might see him as a spiritual lesson. An alchemist painting a Green Lion saw a laboratory manual. Yet both were reaching for the same truth. Nature's cycles hold the secret to transformation, whether of the soul or of lead into gold. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in the rare manuscripts where the green lion is shown with human hands clutching a tree that grows from its own body. Here, the alchemical and the arcane collide. This image mirrors ancient myths of the world tree, its roots and branches connecting heaven and earth. For alchemists, the trees symbolize the stages of their work: blackening, whitening, yellowing, and finally, the coveted rubedo or reddening, representing perfection. The Green Man, reimagined as the Green Lion, becomes not just a participant in this process, but its very engine, a force that consumes, purifies, and renews. Today, we might dismiss these symbols as mere superstition, but consider this: modern chemistry still uses green as shorthand for reactive, unstable states. The green in Green Lion wasn't just about color. It was about potential, the chaotic energy before order emerges. In that sense, the alchemist's obsession with the Green Man wasn't so different from a physicist's fascination with quantum foam. Both are portraits of the formless moment before creation solidifies. The Ripley Scroll's vivid imagery, with its leafy lions and metallic rivers, wasn't just fantastical art. It was a map, one that still whispers to those willing to decipher its tangled, verdant code. By the 18th century, the Green Man had all but vanished from churches, only to reappear in places few would expect. Enter the Freemasons, those enigmatic brothers who turned the symbol into a lodestar of their craft. Walk into a Masonic lodge today, and you might spot him carved into wooden panels or woven into tapestries, his leafy visage watching over initiation rituals. But how did a medieval cathedral motif become sacred to a society of Enlightenment-era gentlemen? The answer lies in a web of myth, reinvention, and a deliberate quest to reclaim the past. Freemasonry's origin stories are steeped in romanticized history. Early Masons claimed direct descent from the medieval stonemasons' guilds, those same artisans who'd hidden green men in shadowy corners. Whether true or not, the connection became a cornerstone of their identity. Manuscripts like the Regius poem, dated around 1490, were held up as proof of an unbroken lineage, linking modern lodges to the cathedral builders. And what better symbol to adopt than the Green Man, a figure already shrouded in guild secrecy, his meaning known only to those worthy and well-qualified. To Freemasons, he wasn't just decoration, he was a living cipher, a bridge between their fraternity and the ancient mysteries they sought to preserve. But the ties grew even more elaborate. Some Masonic rites wove the Green Man into Templar legends, stories of the knightly order's supposed survival after its 14th century suppression. Tales circulated of fugitive Templars finding refuge among stonemasons, passing down esoteric knowledge. The Green Man in this telling became a marker of hidden wisdom, his foliage symbolizing the growth of truth through adversity. Never mind that historical evidence for such connections is thin. What mattered was the narrative, a chain of guardians stretching back centuries with the Green Man as its leafy emblem. Look closely at Masonic imagery, and you'll notice subtle shifts in how the symbol was used. Unlike the church carvings, where green men often seem trapped by their own foliage, Masonic versions radiate control. Take the Green Man of All Souls in Oxford's Lodge, where the face is framed by compass and square, tools representing reason and order. Here, nature isn't a chaotic force to be feared, but a garden to be cultivated. This wasn't medieval piety, it was Enlightenment philosophy dressed in allegory. The Masons weren't just reviving an old symbol, they were remaking it in their own image. Yet the most intriguing twist lies in their rituals. Certain Masonic degrees speak of a lost word, a divine secret once whispered in Solomon's temple. In some lodge traditions, initiates are told this word is etched into the Green Man's leaves, a puzzle to be decoded by degrees. It's a notion that would have baffled medieval stonemasons, yet it reveals how symbols evolve. What began as a pagan survival tactic, then a Christian metaphor, had become a key to spiritual enlightenment. critics argue Freemasonry's adoption was pure fabrication, a way to lend antiquity to a young movement. But perhaps that misses the point. Symbols endure because they're adaptable, because each generation finds new meaning in their roots. When a 19th century Mason traced his finger over a lodge's green man carving, he wasn't just honoring the past. He was adding another layer to a story that refuses to end. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the green man's legacy has taken root in realms far beyond church walls, flourishing in the pages of fantasy novels and on the glowing screens of blockbuster films. Take J.R.R. Tolkien's Ents, those towering, ancient tree herders of Middle-earth. With their gnarled bark skin and voices like creaking branches, they're more than just walking trees. They're the green man's spirit distilled into narrative form. Tolkien, a scholar of medieval literature, didn't just stumble upon this idea, he resurrected it. His Ents embody the same tension between nature's patience and its fury that medieval carvers captured in stone. When Treebeard laments, "Nobody cares for the woods anymore," it's a direct echo of the whispers we imagine from those weathered church carvings, a lament for a world forgetting its wild roots. But Tolkien's vision was pastoral compared to George R.R. Martin's darker take. In Game of Thrones, the old gods of the north have no statues, just weirwood trees with blood-red leaves and faces carved into their trunks, weeping sap like tears. These faces aren't decorative, they're watchers, silent witnesses to oaths and atrocities, their eyes following characters like a forest's collective memory. Martin strips the green man back to his most primal form, not a decorative motif but a numinous presence. The weirwood's faces, with their gaping mouths, could be cousins to the disgorging heads of Rosslyn Chapel, both serving as conduits between the human and the inhuman. Fantasy gaming, too, has embraced the archetype. The Witcher series teems with Leshen's monstrous, antlered entities that command vines to strangle intruders. What's striking is how these modern versions amplify the green man's ambivalence. Medieval carvings could be read as benevolent or sinister. Games make the duality explicit. A Leshen might slaughter villagers, yet it's also the forest's rightful guardian. A balance Tolkien's Ents achieve through wisdom, Martin's gods through eerie passivity. Perhaps the most unexpected revival blooms in superhero lore. Marvel's Groot, a sentient tree creature who regenerates from a single twig, turns the green man into a cosmic parable. His famous line, "I am Groot," isn't just a quirk, it's a nod to the inscrutability of nature itself. Like the oldest Foliate Heads, Groot communicates through presence, not language. Even his sacrificial death and rebirth in Guardians of the Galaxy mirror myths like Tammuz or Osiris, proving these stories still resonate when dressed in space opera finery. What unites these modern reimaginings isn't just aesthetics, it's function. The green man endures because he answers a persistent human question: how do we live with nature's power without being consumed by it? Fantasy writers grasp that this isn't a medieval quandary, but a timeless one. Their Ents and weirwoods and Leshens aren't relics, they're mirrors. In an age of climate crisis, the green man's descendants have become prophets, warning of forests pushed to vengeance or mourning what we've uprooted. The real magic, after centuries of staring down from cathedral walls, he's learned to speak through the stories we can't stop telling about him. Beneath the rolling hills of Gloucestershire, England, lies a discovery that sent shockwaves through the study of the green man, a small Roman Celtic temple, its ruins cradling a face so familiar it redefined the symbol's timeline. Lydney Park, a 3rd century shrine dedicated to the Celtic god Nodens, yielded a carving that shouldn't have been there, a stone visage with leaves budding from its mouth, staring back at archaeologists with the same eerie poise as medieval green men. But this was centuries before Christianity spread, long before stonemasons tucked foliate heads into cathedrals. So what, or who, was this leafy watcher doing in a pagan god's sanctuary? Nodens wasn't just any deity. Linked to healing, the sea, and possibly even dreams, his temple at Lydney was a place of pilgrimage, where votive offerings, tiny bronze dogs, surgical tools hinted at desperate prayers for cures. The site's excavators in the 1920s were stunned to find the Green Man like carving alongside these artifacts, its style unmistakably Roman Celtic. Unlike the later Christian versions, this face wasn't hidden or symbolic. It sat boldly near the temple's entrance, as if guarding the threshold between worlds. Some scholars argue it represents Nodens himself, his connection to nature visualized through the foliage. Others see a lesser spirit, a genii cuculotti, a hooded, often leafy figure from Celtic lore, acting as the god's envoy. But the real controversy lies in the dating. If this carving truly is a precursor to the Green Man, it pushes his origins back nearly 1,000 years earlier than most medieval examples. That's not just a gap, it's a chasm, suggesting the symbol survived Rome's fall, Christianity's rise, and countless cultural shifts to re-emerge in churches. Could medieval stonemasons have known of this older tradition? It's unlikely they visited Lydney's ruins, but symbols have a way of traveling. Foliate heads appear on Roman sarcophagi across Europe, and the Celts worshipped Cernunnos, the antlered god often draped in vine. Perhaps the Green Man wasn't invented in the Middle Ages but remembered. What clinches the connection for many researchers isn't just the foliage, it's the eyes. Like his medieval descendants, the Lydney face stares directly outward, meeting the viewer's gaze with an intensity rare in Roman art. This wasn't decoration, it was confrontation. A demand to be seen, to be recognized. Whether as Nodens' attribute or a standalone guardian, the carving's power lies in that unbroken stare, bridging Celtic reverence for nature and later Christian ambivalence. The temple's location deepens the mystery, perched above an Iron Age hill fort, its foundations literally layered over older worship. The Green Man, it seems, has always been a master of reinvention, growing anew from the roots of whatever culture tended him. Yet skepticism lingers. Without inscriptions, the Lydney carving's meaning remains open. Could it just be a decorative flourish, a Roman artist's riff on acanthus leaves? Maybe, but then why place it where pilgrims would lock eyes with it just before entering the sacred space? The answer might lie in the offerings left nearby, not just tools, but carved phalluses and fertility symbols. Nodens' domain included regeneration, and nothing embodies that more than a face half human, half plant, perpetually caught between decay and rebirth. What Lydney proves more than any definitive origin story is the Green Man's stubborn refusal to fit neatly into categories, pagan or Christian, decorative or divine. He emerges whenever humanity grapples with nature's duality, its capacity to heal and to swallow whole. The temple's ruins remind us that some symbols are older than the stories we tell about them, and that the Green Man's roots, like his vines, might run deeper than we dare to dig. On the weathered walls of Irish churches, another cryptic figure keeps company with the Green Man, the sheela-na-gig. Unlike her leafy counterpart, she's all raw humanity, a naked woman carved in stone, gripping her exaggerated vulva wide open. At first glance, they seem opposites, one cloaked in nature's modesty, the other flaunting human flesh. Yet peel back the layers, and these strange bedfellows might share roots in the same forgotten rituals of fertility and rebirth. The sheela-na-gig's origins are just as hotly debated as the Green Man's. Most cluster around Ireland's 12th century churches, though some lurk as far east as England and France. Folklorists once dismissed them as crude warnings against lust, their exposed bodies meant to shame sinners. But that theory crumbles when you notice where they're placed, above doorways, near baptismal fonts, even beside altars. Sacred spaces, not corners of penance, sound familiar. It's the same puzzle as the green men guarding church thresholds. If both symbols were meant to repel, why position them where worship was most fervent? A closer look reveals eerie parallels. At Kilpeck Church in Herefordshire, a Green Man and sheela-na-gig face each other across the arched doorway, his vines mirroring the curves of her body. In Ireland's Cernunnos church, they're even more entwined. A sheela's thighs sprout leaves, blurring the line between flesh and foliage. These pairings hint at a deeper connection, two halves of an ancient duality. The green man embodies nature's cyclical growth, the sheela, human creation. Together, they might represent the unbreakable bond between land and people, fertility of soil and womb. But the clues grow thornier. Some sheelas clutch their vulvas not just as display, but as if offering something reminiscent of Celtic goddesses like the Morrigan, who straddled battlefields birthing prophecies from her body. Others appear alongside symbols of regeneration, spirals, serpents, even sheaves of grain. In County Clare's Romanc Chapel, one sheela's stone surface is worn smooth by centuries of touching, likely by women seeking aid in childbirth. Could these carvings be remnants of a pre-Christian midwife's shrine, later absorbed into church walls? The most provocative theory ties both symbols to the Cailleach, the Gaelic hag deity who shaped mountains with her footsteps and controlled the seasons. In some myths, she transforms between young maiden and withered crone, a cycle echoed in the sheela's exaggerated youthfulness, and the green man's dual faces, some serene, some skeletal. Perhaps medieval artisans, unable to stamp out her worship, split her essence into two acceptable forms, one veiled in leaves, the other in stone. Yet for all their shared mystery, the sheela-na-gigs met a harsher fate than their foliate cousins. Many were defaced during Puritan crackdowns, their bodies chiseled into anonymity. The green man, at least, could hide behind the guise of Christian metaphor. The sheela's unapologetic carnality left no room for reinterpretation, only erasure. That divergence speaks volumes about which ancient truths the medieval church could tolerate and which had to be shattered. Today, both symbols endure as rebels in plain sight. The green man whispers from tourist guidebooks, his pagan edges softened into decoration. The sheela, though, still shocks her stone grin, a dare to look deeper, to ask why we've buried the raw, life-giving power she represents. Together, they're a reminder that fertility was never just about pretty flowers and fresh shoots. Sometimes it takes a face wreathed in leaves and another grinning between spread thighs to tell the whole tangled truth. Look closely at the leaves twisting around a green man's face, and you'll notice they're never random. Each plant is a deliberate choice, a botanical cipher waiting to be deciphered. Oak leaves, thick and lobed, dominate many carvings, their presence a nod to a sacred tree so revered. Cutting one down was once punishable by death in Celtic lore. Medieval minds saw the oak as the king of the forest, a pillar of strength, yet its acorns symbolized humility, the mighty tree yielding tiny seeds. This duality made it perfect for green man carvings, a reminder that even the most powerful are bound to nature's cycles. But the oak's ties run deeper. Druids held their rites in oak groves, and Christian missionaries often built churches atop these very sites, grafting new beliefs onto old roots. When a green man sprouts oak leaves, he's not just a face in the foliage, he's a living relic of that uneasy truce between faiths. Then there's ivy, its serpentine vines curling from mouths and eye sockets in carvings like those at Jerpoint Abbey in Ireland. Unlike the sturdy oak, ivy was the medieval emblem of persistence, a plant that could strangle a tree yet also cling to life through winter's harshest frosts. Herbalists prized it for binding wounds, both physical and spiritual. In the Physica 12th century, mystic Hildegard von Bingen wrote of ivy's power to draw out fever as it draws itself upward. But ivy carried darker whispers too. Its evergreen leaves, paired with berries as dark as blood, linked it to Dionysus's frenzied rites and the wild women who followed him. When a disgorging head spews ivy, is it a symbol of healing, or the chaotic, untamable force beneath civilization's thin veneer? Hawthorn, with its sharp thorns and Maytime blossoms, weaves its own tangled tale. Carved into green men at places like Worcester Cathedral, its sprigs blur the line between protection and peril. Medieval peasants planted hawthorn around homes to repel witches, yet its sweet-smelling flowers were central to Beltane festivals right so rowdy, Puritans later banned the sinful maypole. The tree was sacred to fairies in Celtic lore, harming one risked supernatural wrath. Even its medical uses were paradoxical. Its berries could steady a racing heart, but misused, they'd slow it to a fatal stop. A green man crowned in hawthorn isn't just decorative. He's a boundary marker guarding the threshold between safe and savage, just as hawthorn hedges divided village from wilderness. The rarest of all are the apple-bearing green men, like the one peering from a capitol in France's Vézelay Abbey. Here, the message is ripe with biblical echoes: the fruit of Eden, the cider apples of Avalon, the golden apples of Norse immortality. Unlike the oak's masculine might or ivy's sinuous ambiguity, the apple-green man feels like a cipher for lost knowledge. Medieval herbals called the apple tree the keeper of secrets, its roots said to delve as deep as its branches reached high. In a 12th century Welsh poem, Merlin himself receives visions while lounging beneath one. When a green man's cheeks bulge with apple twigs, is he offering wisdom or guarding it? These plants weren't chosen for aesthetics alone. They're a living lexicon, each species a word in the green man's silent language. To read a carving is to unpack centuries of layered meaning. The oak's steadfastness, the ivy's tenacity, the hawthorn's sharp-edged grace. Even the placement matters. Oak-leafed faces often cluster near church entrances, a symbolic sentinel. Ivy-choked heads loom over crypts, perhaps guiding souls through death's tangled undergrowth. Hawthorn green men favor choir stalls, their prickly presence a reminder that piety isn't always gentle. What emerges isn't just a catalogue of medieval botany, but a map of the psyche. These artists weren't carving plants, they were encoding the human relationship with the wild in all its terror and tenderness. The next time you stand before a green man, don't just count his leaves. Listen, they're speaking in a dialect older than cathedrals, rustling with the secrets of sacred groves and the herbalists who once whispered to them. The Reformation didn't just topple statues, it severed the green man's roots. As Protestant fervor swept through 16th century Europe, the carvings that had watched over worshippers for centuries were suddenly recast as Catholic excess, even idolatry. In England, Puritan mobs took chisels to popish grotesques, hacking away at the foliate faces in places like St. Paul's Cathedral. The ones that survived were often whitewashed, their leafy features smothered under layers of lime plaster. By the time the Enlightenment dawned, the green man had become a ghost, a half-remembered relic of a superstitious past, his meaning buried under centuries of theological rubble. Yet symbols have a way of hibernating. When Victorian architects like Augustus Pugin began their Gothic revival crusade in the 1800s, they weren't just rebuilding churches, they were resurrecting medieval aesthetics as an antidote to industrial alienation. Pugin's designs for London's Houses of Parliament bristle with green men, their carved foliage a deliberate rebuke to the soot-choked factories beyond the Thames. This wasn't mere decoration, it was romanticism in stone. To Victorians, the green man represented a pre-industrial Eden, a time when humanity and nature coexisted in harmony. Never mind that medieval carvers likely saw him as more complex for the 19th century. He became a mascot for nostalgia, his revival as much about rejecting smokestacks as reviving old art. The real twist came in the 1960s when the green man sprouted anew in the unlikeliest soil. The burgeoning eco-spiritual movement. Folklorists like Lady Raglan, who first coined the term green man in a 1939 essay, had already rekindled academic interest. But it was the counterculture that truly set him free. At the first Glastonbury festivals, revelers wore oak leaf crowns and painted his face on banners, transforming him from an architectural footnote into a living icon of environmental reverence. Suddenly, the green man wasn't just a medieval oddity, he was a patron saint for the age of ecology. his vines recast as a call to rewield the human soul. This modern revival took its boldest form in the works of artists like Mary Reynolds, whose We Are the Ark movement reimagines the green man as a guardian of biodiversity. Where Victorian carvers had softened his edges, contemporary portrayals often amplify his wildness. Take Brian Froud's iconic illustrations, where the green man's face emerges from gnarled bark like a challenge, his eyes holding both promise and warning. Even pop culture absorbed the shift. Films like The Wicker Man and Annihilation depict foliate entities as nature's avengers, retaliating against human hubris in ways that would have baffled medieval masons. What's fascinating is how each revival layered new meanings onto the old. The Victorians saw a decorative medievalist fantasy. The hippies saw a pagan eco-warrior. Today, he's claimed by everyone from neo-druids to urban gardeners, his image stamped on protest signs and permaculture manuals. Yet beneath these reinventions, the core mystery remains. Whether adorning a 19th-century pulpit or a modern-day mural, the green man still asks the same question: can we remember we're part of the wild before the wild reminds us itself? In the eerie glow of candlelit medieval scriptoriums, a monstrous figure rides into King Arthur's hall, his skin green as moss, his beard like a tangled thicket, his very presence an affront to courtly decorum. This is the Green Knight from the 14th century poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a being so vividly alien, he feels ripped from the same mythic soil as the cathedral carvings. But is he just a poetic invention, or could this emerald giant be the green man in disguise? The clues lie not just in the text, but in the manuscript's own marginalia, where vines curl around knights like living prophecies. The poem's opening scene is pure theatre. The Green Knight bursts into Camelot's Yuletide feast, challenging the court to a lethal game. When Gawain accepts and lops off the stranger's head, the knight simply picks it up, holding his own grinning face as he reminds Gawain to meet him in a year for a return blow. It's a moment that chills modern readers, yet medieval audiences might have recognized something familiar. The Green Knight's decapitation and rebirth mirror ancient vegetation myths, where gods like Osiris or Adonis die and return with the seasons. Even his color isn't just fantastical. In medieval symbolism, green represented vitality, but also otherworldliness, the shade of fairies and forest spirits. Now flip to the original manuscript's illustrated borders. Amidst the gilded letters, artists sketched faces eerily reminiscent of church green men, foliate heads peering from corners, their mouths spewing vines that twine around the text. One marginal doodle even shows a knight sprouting leaves, as if the Green Knight's essence is bleeding into the parchment itself. These weren't careless scribbles. Marginalia often held hidden commentary, and here the artist seems to whisper, this isn't just a story, it's an old myth wearing new clothes, yet the differences are as revealing as the similarities. Cathedral green men are static, frozen in stone, while the Green Knight is all motion, laughing, taunting, demanding action. He's not a symbol to ponder, he's a force to confront. And where church carvings balance beauty and menace, the Green Knight leans into grotesquerie. His greenness isn't decorative, it's unsettling, a reminder of nature's indifference to human vanity. When Gawain finally finds him at the eerie Green Chapel, a grassy mound more ancient than Christianity, the knight isn't just a foe, he's the wilderness itself, testing civilization's illusions of control. The poem's climax holds the twist. The Green Knight reveals he's also Bertilac, the lord whose castle Gawain visited, a shapeshifter blurring human and wild. Here, the connection to green men deepens. Like those carvings that hid pagan roots in Christian spaces, the Green Knight wears courtly disguise, only to peel it back and show his true, untamed face. Even the holly bob he carries when first appearing a Yuletide decoration echoes the evergreen plants adorning Foliate Heads, symbols of life persisting through winter's death. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in the poem's historical context. Written during the Black Death's ravages when corpses outnumbered flowers, Sir Gawain might have been a desperate incantation. A hope that like the Green Knight, like the Green Men watching from churches' nature's cycles would bring renewal after plague. The manuscript's vines, then, aren't just art. Their roots reaching through time, tethering a literary marvel to the same mysteries carved in stone. One whispers of death and resurrection, the other laughs in the face of both, his axe always poised to fall. Shakespeare's forests were never just backdrops, they breathed with life, whispered secrets, and sometimes hid familiar faces among their leaves. Take A Midsummer Night's Dream, where Oberon's dominion pulses with the same wild energy as the Green Man's leafy gaze. The Fairy King's realm is no pretty glade. It's a place of tangled roots and transformative magic, where mortals stumble into the woods as fools and emerge forever changed. Oberon himself, with his cloak of shadows and command over growing things, mirrors the Green Man's duality, both nurturer and trickster. When he squeezes the love potion onto Titania's eyelids, the juice drips like sap from a wounded tree, blurring the line between enchantment and nature's own alchemy. Even Puck, that shrewd and knavish sprite, embodies the Green Man's mischievous side, his laughter echoing through the branches like wind through cathedral carvings. But the clues grow thicker in As You Like It. The Forest of Arden isn't just a setting, it's a character, a force that strips courtly pretenses bare. When Duke Senior declares, "Sweet are the uses of adversity," he might as well be channeling the wisdom of 1,000 Foliate Heads. The forest's power to humble and heal mirrors the Green Man's role as a mediator between human folly and nature's truths. And then there's Jax, the melancholic philosopher who lingers under oaks, spinning metaphors about deer and rivers. His famous "all the world's a stage" speech takes on new weight when you picture him leaning against a tree carved with leafy faces, a living actor performing for stone-eyed watchers. Shakespeare never names the Green Man outright, but his plays drip with botanical symbolism. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, the lovers sleep on beds of wild thyme and oxlips, plants medieval herbalists tied to visions and thresholds. The very title, As You Like It, winks at the audience, a sly invitation to see the forest as they choose pastoral idyll or pagan holdout. Even the play's stagings hint at deeper roots. Tudor-era theatres often used real greenery for props, their boughs still humming with folk memory. When Bottom transforms into an ass, his head crowned with ivy, the joke lands differently if you know ivy was Dionysus' sacred plant, a nod to older revels lurking under Christian England's surface. The most tantalizing evidence, though, lies outside the texts. In Stratford-upon-Avon's Holy Trinity Church, just steps from Shakespeare's grave, a green man peers down from the rafters. Did the playwright glimpse that face during sermons, letting it seep into his imagination? Or was the symbol so woven into rural life that it bloomed unbidden in his verse? The answer might lie in the audiences themselves. Groundlings who cheered Puck's antics likely knew folk tales of green-coated forest spirits, while nobility caught the classical allusions. Shakespeare, the consummate shapeshifter, gave both sides just enough to see what they wanted, just as medieval stonemasons hid pagan echoes in plain sight. What's certain is this: when Shakespeare's characters vanish into the woods, they're stepping into older stories. The Green Man might not speak in iambic pentameter, but his presence lingers in every rustling branch, every fruit that overripe falls itself at the opening of the womb. These plays aren't just comedies, they're palimpsests, their margins scrawled with the fingerprints of a world that never quite forgot the wild. Today, the Green Man has stepped out of medieval stone and into the heart of modern environmental movements, his leafy gaze reframed as a clarion call for ecological awareness. In Sheffield, England, a colossal steel sculpture rises from the landscape, the Green Man of the North, his face forged from recycled metal, his wild hair a tangle of industrial scraps reshaped into vines. This isn't just public art, it's a manifesto. Designed by sculptor Jason Thompson, the installation merges the ancient symbol with contemporary urgency, his metallic leaves rustling with the echoes of climate protests and rewilding campaigns. Visitors don't just see a face, they confront a paradox: nature's resilience crafted from the very materials that threaten it. Environmental groups have embraced the Green Man as a mascot for the Anthropocene. Organizations like Extinction Rebellion weave his image into banners, his foliate face painted in vibrant greens beside slogans like "Nature doesn't need us, we need nature." Here, he's no longer a cryptic carving but a rallying point, his medieval roots repurposed to question modern extraction. Even the Eden Project, Cornwall's biome wonderland, frames its mission with his likeness, their educational programs using his image to teach children about symbiosis, how every breath we take is borrowed from the photosynthesis of trees. Artists worldwide are reimagining him for an era of climate anxiety. In New York's Battery Park, Australian artist Gilly Edwards installed a mosaic green man whose leaves shift color with the light, mimicking seasonal change. Over in Germany, the Grün Man Festival celebrates sustainable living with street performers donning living suits of moss, their breath fogging the air as they enact ancient fertility rites with a modern twist. These interpretations aren't nostalgia, they're alchemy, transforming an old symbol into new language for planetary grief and hope. Yet the most poignant revival might be in grassroots activism. In Ireland's protest against deforestation, farmers have painted green men on placards next to saplings, merging the icon with the actual fight for soil and canopy. A Welsh community garden project calls itself the Green Man's Orchard, planting medieval apple varieties beneath carvings of his face, literal roots reconnecting to his past. Even corporate sustainability efforts co-opt him, though not without irony. A recent ad campaign for a carbon-neutral brewery featured a hipster green man with a beard of hop vines, a pint in hand. The tension here is palpable. Can a symbol born from stone and secrecy retain its power in the age of hashtags and hyper-consumption? Perhaps the answer lies in Sheffield's steel giant, where schoolchildren press their hands against his oxidized cheek, leaving fleeting fingerprints on the surface. The Green Man endures not because he's fixed in meaning, but because he's fertile ground, a face that lets each generation see what it needs to see. Today, that's a reflection of our own tangled relationship with the wild, part reverence, part fear, and the dawning realization that the vines we've spent centuries carving might soon be the ones that save us. Wander through the weathered graveyard of Kilpeck Church in Herefordshire, and you'll find the Green Man lurking where you least expect him, not just on arches or pews, but etched into the very stones meant to mark the dead. One particularly haunting example stares up from a moss-covered slab, his leafy beard spilling across the surface as if the earth itself is reclaiming him. This isn't random decoration. In medieval Europe, where death was a constant companion, the Green Man's presence on tombs might have been more than artistic whimsy. It could have been a plea, a promise, or even a whispered spell. The placement of these grave-bound green men tells its own story. At Kilpeck, they cluster near the oldest burials, those of children and pilgrims, the souls considered most vulnerable in the afterlife. Their leafy faces often frame crosses or clasp vine-wrapped anchors, symbols of hope and steadfastness. Some scholars argue this was a form of spiritual armor, the Green Man's enduring vitality acting as a shield against decay. After all, if his foliage could survive centuries of rain and frost, perhaps the souls beneath could too. Others point to his resemblance to ancient psychopomps, guides like Hermes or Anubis, who shepherded the dead to their rest. A green man carved at the foot of a tombstone might have been a silent sentinel, his vines mapping the path to whatever lay beyond. Yet the symbolism grows richer when you examine the carving's botanical details. Many graveyard green men sprout ivy, a plant medieval lore tied to eternal life thanks to its evergreen resilience. At All Saints' Church in Matlock, Derbyshire, One tombstone's foliate face disgorges oak leaves, a tree sacred to Thor, later baptized into Christian symbolism as a sign of endurance. Even the direction of the vines matters. On several Welsh graves, the foliage spirals inward toward the deceased's name, as if drawing energy back into the earth. It's a stark contrast to church green men, whose leaves often burst outward in chaotic abundance. Here, nature's cycle feels more intimate, more deliberate, a visual prayer for rebirth. The most poignant examples blur the line between monument and mystery. In Shropshire's St. Lawrence Church, a weathered slab shows the green man's face half sunk into the stone, his mouth open in what could be a scream or a song. Local legend claims this marks the grave of a medieval herbalist who spoke with the green, a folk healer whose knowledge of plants bordered on the uncanny. Whether true or not, the story captures the duality of these carvings. They're both memorials and portals, rooted in grief yet reaching for something timeless. Why did this symbol, so often associated with life's ferocity, find a home among the dead? The answer might lie in the medieval view of death itself, not as an end but a transformation. Just as the green man's foliage dies each winter only to resurge in spring, so too might the soul shed its body to bloom elsewhere. The next time you pass an old churchyard, look closely at the lichen-spotted stones. That leafy face staring back isn't just a relic. It's an old promise carved deep that endings are never quite what they seem. Walk into any modern Wiccan circle during a Beltane celebration, and you might witness an invocation that would have baffled medieval stonemasons. A call to the green man as a living god, his antlers cradling the moon, his breath the wind through the trees. For contemporary pagans, the green man has shed his stone shackles, transforming from architectural oddity to embodiment of the divine masculine. At a recent gathering in the Oregon woods, High Priestess Elspeth Rivers traced his outline in the air with an oak branch, chanting, "Leafed Lord of the Wildwood, root our hearts in your soil." To her coven, he's neither warning nor decoration, he's the pulse of the forest itself, a deity as immediate as the dew on their ritual blades. This modern worship isn't just revival, it's reinvention. Wiccans often blend the green man with older horned gods like Cernunnos or Pan, creating a hybrid figure who straddles Celtic myth and medieval mystery. At London's Museum of Witchcraft, curator Peter Gray notes how 20th century occultists like Gerald Gardner, Wicca's founder, borrowed church carvings as proof of pagan survivals. The green man became a banner, Gray explains, a way to say, see, they never really erased us. Yet the Wiccan green man differs subtly from his stone ancestors. Where medieval carvings often show him passive, even trapped by foliage, modern rituals celebrate his agency, a god who chooses to wear the wild, not one consumed by it. The occult's fascination takes a darker turn in Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, where the green man appears not as a deity but as the Knight of Discs. Crowley's version is Earth incarnate armored in living wood, his steed a beast of burden crowned with vines. Unlike Wicca's benevolent lord, this figure is sheer force, his energy slow, persistent, and inexorable, as Crowley's companion Lady Frieda Harris painted him. The card symbolizes material manifestation, the grinding power of nature to reclaim and transform. It's a far cry from gentle maypole dances. Here, the green man is the storm that topples kingdoms, the rot that fertilizes new growth. What unites these modern interpretations is the green man's role as mediator between worlds. For Wiccans, he channels ecological reverence, a face for climate grief and hope. In Crowley's system, he's the relentless cycle behind all creation and decay. Both strip away the Christian context that once framed him, exposing older bones beneath. Perhaps that's why the symbol endures. He's clay to be reshaped by each generation's needs. A medieval mason might have crossed himself after carving those leafy features. Today's devotees pour ale at his roots and whisper secrets to the bark, proving some symbols don't fade. They root deeper. Step into the Old Bell Inn in Gloucestershire, and you'll find a green man hiding where patrons least expect, carved into the wooden mantelpiece above the hearth, his leaves blackened by centuries of smoke. This isn't some medieval relic. The pub was built in the 1600s, long after the Reformation scrubbed churches clean of superstitious imagery. Yet here he is, grinning through the ale-stained air, proof that the green man never truly faded. He just went underground, resurfacing in the unlikeliest corners of everyday life. From the beams of London's historic taverns to the ironwork of Victorian bridges, these architectural Easter eggs tell a story of quiet rebellion, where artisans kept the old ways alive by tucking them into the fabric of ordinary places. Take the Seven Stars pub in Holborn, London, a survivor of the Great Fire of 1666. Above the door, a disgorging head spews vines straight from his mouth, his face twisted in ecstasy or agony. The pub's 17th century builders could have chosen any decoration. Why this? Local lore claims the carving warded off evil spirits, but historians suspect something slyer. Many pubs were built on the sites of demolished monasteries, their stones repurposed. The green man here might be a stonemason's inside joke, a pagan wink smuggled into Protestant London. Even the pub's name hints at deeper layers. The Seven Stars could refer to the Pleiades, a constellation tied to harvest myths across cultures. Then there's the green man hiding in plain sight on Manchester's Albert Bridge, his stony gaze overlooking the River Irwell. Built in 1871, this Victorian structure is festooned with foliage, but look closely at the keystones and one arch reveals a familiar face. Why would industrial age engineers bother with a medieval motif? The answer lies in the bridge's architect, Thomas Page, a man obsessed with blending modern engineering and Gothic revival flair. To him, the green man wasn't just decoration. He was a charm against the river's notorious floods, a silent guardian woven into iron and stone. But the most surprising green men lurk in civic buildings far from sacred spaces. Boston's 19th century custom house boasts a foliate face amid its maritime carvings, his seaweed beard curling around anchors. In Cardiff's City Hall, a disgorging head lurks above the council chamber, appropriate for a building where political speeches sometimes feel as endless as the vines spilling from his mouth. Even New York's Woolworth Building, that Art Deco skyscraper, hides a green man in its lobby's terracotta details. These weren't accidents. Architects of the industrial era reached back to medieval symbolism to lend gravitas to modern power, dressing steel and concrete in the language of older mysteries. What unites these scattered faces is their subversive persistence. In pubs, they became drinking buddies to secrets too dangerous for daylight. On bridges, they stood as talismans against chaos. In government buildings, they whispered that nature still ruled, even in chambers of human law. Each placement feels deliberate, not random homage, but a thread pulled from a tapestry older than the structures themselves. The artisans who carved them may have lost their names to history, but their message endures. The wild doesn't vanish. It waits, watches, and sprouts anew in the cracks of our certainty. Carbon dating promised to settle the green man's timeline once and for all, until it unraveled a scandal no one saw coming. When researchers tested the oak beams framing a 14th century green man carving in Hereford Cathedral, the wood's age matched perfectly. But the stone itself, centuries younger, this wasn't a medieval original, it was a Victorian forgery, painstakingly inserted into aged timber to fool the eye. Suddenly, a chilling question spread through academic circles. How many ancient green men are actually 19th century fabrications, their leafy faces products of Gothic revival nostalgia rather than genuine history? The controversy centers on the 1800s, when architects like Augustus Pugin were obsessed with resurrecting medieval aesthetics. Churches ravaged by Reformation iconoclasm became prime targets for restoration, a term often meaning wholesale reinvention. Stonemasons, trained in Gothic techniques but steeped in Romanticism, added foliate heads where none existed originally. Some did it for aesthetics, others, like infamous forger William Smith, sold carvings to collectors as rediscovered relics. Modern tools leave microscopic striations invisible to the naked eye. At St. Mary's in Shrewsbury, a green man once hailed as a 13th century masterpiece was exposed when laser scanning revealed drill marks from an 1883 rotary tool. But not all misstated carvings are outright frauds. Take the Green Men of Tewkesbury Abbey, where 19th century repairs blended so seamlessly with medieval stone that even experts debated which was which. Here, the issue isn't deception but erosion, time wearing surfaces smooth until old and new become indistinguishable. Advanced techniques like reflectance transformation imaging now tease apart the layers, analyzing how light interacts with tool marks at a micron level. A genuine medieval chisel strikes at a consistent angle. Victorian tools, with their machined precision, leave telltale uniformity. The most startling revelations come from lichenometry, the study of lichen growth on stone. At Wells Cathedral, a green man's lichen colony suggested 600 years of exposure, until DNA sequencing proved the spores matched samples from Pagan's workshop. The lichen had been transplanted, a deliberate antiquing technique, yet even this forensic detective work sparks debate. Some argue Gothic revival carvings deserve preservation too, as artifacts of Victorian medievalism. After all, the Green Man has always been a shapeshifter, adapting to each era's needs. Whether crafted in 1400 or 1880, his power lies less in his age than in the stories we graft onto his leaves. Chisel meets limestone with a sharp talk, sending a shower of pale dust into the morning air. Master stonemason Elena Hart leans back, squinting at the block taking shape beneath her hands. "You don't just carve a green man," she says, running a thumb along the rough outline of emerging lips. "You negotiate with him." Her toolkit sprawls open, a time capsule of medieval craftsmanship. A clawed chisel for texture, a punch for defining curls of foliage, a fine pointed riffler for the delicate veins of leaves. Each tool, she explains, isn't just functional, it's symbolic. The mallet's oak handle, cut from a tree planted the year she began her apprenticeship, carries the weight of continuity. "Every strike is a conversation," she murmurs. The stone talks back. "Watch her work and you'll notice the sequence isn't arbitrary." She starts with the eyes, always the eyes. "They're the anchor," Elena says, tapping the pupil into existence with a drill bit wrapped in leather to soften the blow. Medieval carvers believed the first stroke of the chisel here invited the spirit into the stone. Next comes the mouth, but not as a static shape. As she carves the upper lip, the chisel angles upward, a deliberate choice. Disgorging heads vomit foliage, but foliate heads, their mouths are giving, she explains. The curve of the tool mimics the motion of breath, as if the figure might exhale sap or song. Then the leaves. Elena switches to a dog-tooth chisel, its serrated edge creating the jagged texture of hawthorn. "This is where the old guilds hid their jokes," she laughs, pointing to a vein that spirals into a tiny, hidden face. Medieval masons often tucked personal signatures into foliage, a leering imp, a lover's initial, even caricatures of irritable priests. As she works, the symbolism deepens. Oak leaves cluster at the brow for wisdom, ivy snakes around the jawline for resilience, and a single apple branch curls behind the ear, a nod to forbidden knowledge. The final act is the most ritualistic. Elena dampens the stone with a sponge, revealing the green man's true color as the water darkens the surface. The ancients called this waking the stone, she says. The moisture highlights cracks, forcing her to adapt, just as medieval carvers did when flaws revealed themselves. "A perfect block is dead," she insists. "It's the imperfections that let him breathe." When she steps back, dust coating her apron, the face staring back isn't just a replica. It's a reanimation. The tools might be centuries old, but the hands wielding them remember. What's startling is how the process mirrors the Green Man's own myths. Creation through destruction, discipline yielding wildness, and always the sense that the figure was there all along, waiting to be uncovered. We think we're making art, Elena muses, wiping her brow. But really, we're just peeling back layers to meet something older. Her chisel hovers, then strikes, one last tap to the left eyelid, wide enough to catch the light. Now he watches, now he waits, just like always. Centuries pass, empires rise and fall, religions shift like sand, yet through it all, the Green Man remains, his vines creeping across time itself, always adapting but never fading. What is it about this leafy enigma that captivates us so deeply? Perhaps because he isn't just a relic of the past, but a mirror reflecting our own tangled relationship with nature. In an age of concrete and screens, his silent stare is a reminder of the wildness we've tried so hard to tame, yet still ache to reconnect with. The medieval craftsmen who carved him into sacred stone understood something we're only now relearning. Nature isn't merely something outside us. It's in our breath, our bones, the very rhythm of our hearts. The Green Man endures because he holds space for contradiction. He's both gentle and fierce, a nurturer with thorns in his smile. He's life bursting forth, yet also the decay that feeds new growth. Pagan or Christian, ancient or modern, he defies simple labels. That's why you'll find him etched into the walls of eco-villages and tattooed onto the arms of city dwellers who have never set foot in a forest. He speaks to the part of us that still remembers how to listen to the wind, even if we've forgotten the words. There's magic in his persistence. He slipped through the cracks of history because he was too vital to discard, too ambiguous to fully explain. Like the ivy that cracks stone, he found ways to survive, hidden in churches, smuggled into pubs, resurrected in fantasy tales. Each generation projects its fears and longings onto him, yet he remains irreducible. A medieval peasant might have seen divine judgment in those carved leaves. A Victorian romantic saw nostalgia. Today, we see an environmental plea, the truth. He's all these things and none of them. Symbols endure precisely because they refuse to be pinned down. So next time you visit an old church, look up. Scan the shadowy corners of arches, the edges of pews, the spaces where dust gathers. You might meet his leafy gaze and feel that uncanny spark of recognition. Not just of the carving itself, but of the wild green thread that connects us all, winding through time like a vine no axe can sever. The stones will whisper their secrets if you lean close enough.